Night driving, one of Sage's favorite recreational activities. It had taken all her resolve not to light up the cigarette before even pulling the car out of her driveway. At least she'd managed to wait until she'd hit the exit ramp onto the interstate. Then it was burn time. No matter how loud she cranked up the radio, no matter how loud Black Planet got, no matter how fast and hard she puffed on the cigarette, nothing could remove that voice from ringing inside her skull. It had been 4 months. 4 months since she'd last spoken to Dr. Jameson. Sure, she caught glimpses of him on campus, even in Belsing's, the computer lab. That's where his office was. His private office. The office she'd visited twice. Jesus. Dumbest girl in the universe. They'll name an award after her one day. A ceremonial plaque of a donkey to be given at the Darwin Awards. Miracles weren't something that typically fell into Sage's personal ethos, but it was a real miracle, a blessing, really, that she'd not gotten expelled for. A new set of high beams mounted the hill behind her. The beams slimmed as the car grew closer. A dark sedan. Wasn't burnt copper, was it? That's it! Fuck it! Brown, not burnt copper. Cool California night must have took pity on her poor, wretched soul, because the breeze suddenly melted away, leaving her in a peaceful, dark quietness, but with a slice of moonlight about her car. Thanks, she said aloud around the end of the cigarette. Later, before she went to the interview, she'd fished the body spray from her bag to douse herself. I better land this fucking job. She stubbed out the cigarette with the heel of her designer boot and got back into the car. Started when she was just a teenager. A true passion, a vision for the future. A future that did not fear death. A future where death was no more. A future where death was quite literally cured. Even as a teenager, she could admit this was an ambitious goal, not to mention idealistic. Too much for most guys, but especially teenage guys, whose biggest concerns stemmed from food or sex, how to get the best and most out of both. A girl with dreams of changing the world by eliminating death could understandably be a tad overwhelming, which made finding and keeping a lover somewhat difficult. Sometime during her senior year in high school, Sage's libido dipped. Actually, it died. She started staying in on Saturday nights instead of clubbing with her friends. A bottle of expensive red wine, A hot bath and 2 AA batteries was much preferable to a fling with a frat boy of the week. Early on in her freshman year of college, Sage began missing sex, the act of lovemaking, the human, intimate, skin-on-skin contact. That tingly feeling of excitement right before she'd fuck somebody new who she was sure would rock her world. But she couldn't make herself sleep with the guy, any guy. So she fooled around a bit with a woman, a classmate from her world history class. The newness wore off quick, and Sage found herself celibate once more. Panic set in. Was she frigid? A frightening journey of frostbite of the loins? After a few short months, Sage's forced celibacy became not so unbearable. She might even say she found it refreshing. Batteries never disappoint. And so, Sage embraced her dry spell. Shortly before grad school, she swore off sex, temporarily, and concentrated all her passion on her studies. Then she met Professor Stoney Jameson. Something electric about his enthusiasm for the growing high-tech industry of computing. Although his interests centered around entertainment, mostly gaming. While her passion regarded the humanitarian possibilities to be gained by sophisticated technology. Specifically, Sage was fascinated by the advances made in the medical industry as of late. The first vaccine for hepatitis A, a vaccine for Lyme disease next. And most amazingly were the speculations in popular scientific journals about the potential reality of cloning a sheep, alongside the critical findings within the Human Genome Project and revolutionary new understandings of DNA and genetic manipulations. We are truly living in the cusp of a brand new world, she'd written in her dissertation. Not only can we stand upon the shoulders of giants, we may soon be able to clone those giants. The unimaginable potential therein. A powerful new age, not fueled by mere speculation belonging strictly in science fiction, but credible theories and notions found within the pages of accredited science and medical journals. Intellectually, Sage and Stoney shared an appreciation for the possible future, which had never happened before. Though a gifted computer programmer and computer graphics artist, Stoney also harbored a deep appreciation for ancient history, especially the Aztec civilization, and his office showcased several painted depictions of the Aztec sun and other related symbols. The winged serpent was her favorite. Sage considered herself a sexual being. Confidence and creativity were 2 traits she favored in the bedroom, yet oftentimes found both quite lacking in her lovers. But Stoney worked both with ease. Not only could he stimulate her brain with equal parts practicality and far-fetched visions of the future brought to life by advancements in technology, but he could also arouse her body with the slightest touch. Sometimes, even the slightest whisper of his stern voice. Stoney commanded both intelligence and imagination with absolute mastery. She began to see Stoney as not just another guy, but as one of the potential giants of the future. almost old enough to be her father, but she had no daddy issues, and therefore chalked up her attraction for Stoney to a simple melding of two intellectual and sexual creatures, exploring the fundamentals of human existence, mind and body. As a professor behind the podium, he brimmed a zealousness, not unlike that of a cult preacher. He lectured on the science of SVGA, which allotted for an 800 by 600 pixel resolution. He raved about the introduction of 64-bit processors. His latest lectures centered around up-and-coming games. Command and Conquer for one, Descent for another. Online gaming. It was the way of the future, and violence and sex was its chosen mode of transportation. He preached this taboo ideology with the passion of brimstone and fire. Southern Baptist minister on Easter Sunday morning. Sage wasn't much of a gamer, and she wasn't a proponent of violence in any manner. But she respected his enthusiasm. Everybody did. Professor Jameson worked a special kind of magnetism that few could escape. He had a way of making you feel special, one of a kind. Ironically, he had this effect on everybody, which makes everybody not so special anymore. But nobody cared. They couldn't help but feel motivated and inspired by Professor Jameson's in-your-face and sometimes dark passion. Picture Robin Williams in Dead Poet Society. Now, replace poetry with technology, and, well, you have your highly revered professor. Only the most gifted students were chosen for his class. Sage counted herself fortunate to be one of those chosen. He was a celebrity of academia, known all over campus as the hip and cool professor. A graphics art student hacked a cover of Rolling Stone magazine to supplant Stoney's head onto the body of James Hetfield, which Stoney subsequently posted on the wall inside of his classroom. From then on, Professor Jameson became known as Professor Rolling Stone. Stoney planned to pioneer a new and edgy and graphic genre of gaming that he said would blow the world away. It would make Neverwinter Nights, and especially the X Window System games, obsolete. It would be the closest thing to virtual reality and support thousands and thousands of players worldwide to coexist in the same virtual environment. And while Sage wasn't a big gamer herself, having only dabbled here and there with Super Mario Bros. And a cute little game called Bubble Bobble that her roommate owned, she could appreciate Stoney's ambitious efforts in the tech world. But as hip and devilishly charming as Stoney could be, he was also brutally dedicated to achieving great success in all aspects of his life, and only settled for absolutely perfection in each undertaking he committed himself to. This was a trait that many students found inspiring. So much so that for several semesters, a battle cry heard by many students before a test day was, "Give me the power of the stone so that I may achieve ultimate greatness!" Even Sage had quietly whispered the words before her biotech final in her last semester. "Give me the power of the stone so that I may achieve ultimate greatness." One night, Stoney came into the cellar club while Sage was bartending. He shot the shit with her for 2 hours until she got off the clock. They both had too much to drink that night. Combine a bottle of whiskey and an extended dry spell, and you have one big fat mistake. Sage was not unfamiliar with bondage, albeit her experiences stayed to the light and jovial side of the dark eroticism. But after that night, Sage learned what it truly meant to be submissive to a lover. By the second time they hooked up, he was no longer Professor Stoney, but Sir. The sexual encounter was a mix of twisted surrealism, crossed with a dreamlike escapism, on a cosmic level, and she hadn't even taken any ecstasy. Stoney wouldn't allow any form of sexual enhancement drugs, not even alcohol. Aside from their first night together, he'd explained that the way he did it, she wouldn't need any drugs, and he'd been absolutely right. Even his method of denying her an orgasm until he gave her permission had proved to be some of the most intense orgasms she'd ever experienced. He took her out to expensive dinners, but always picked out every article of clothing she was to wear. Oftentimes, new dresses and lingerie he'd bought for her specifically for that evening. While they dined, he'd lavishly lay out the plans of what was to happen once they were done eating. The plans were more like detailed instructions of how Sage was to perform, what she was to do, and what she was not to do. It didn't take Sage long to realize Stoney Jameson was an enormous control freak on a clinical level. They would always check into the Hotel Moreau, her family's legacy and chain of 5-star hotels. Fortunately, none of her family worked at the one they used as their playhouse, but she always knew that Stoney chose the hotel on purpose, as a form of humiliation, and to remind her that even though she might be the heir of a multi-billion-dollar hotel chain, that she was powerless beneath his control. He'd give her commands in a low, harsh, but civil tone, and she'd obey without hesitation. At first, it was out of respect for Sir, but quickly, it became out of fear. In her personal life and academic life, she took pride in being an independent woman who'd left the comfort of her family, even given up a trust fund, all in the name of making it on her own. But Stoney had so easily broken her, made her bend over and crawl and beg on command. And it frightened her. So, after 5 weeks and countless sexual encounters, she decided to break it off and leave their little game. Problem was, Stoney wasn't willing to stop the game. Whereas he'd once given her mind-blowing orgasms, all he could give her now was the creeps. Part of his creepiness stemmed from his drastic dual personas. By day, he was the gentle, caring, and charming soul and friend to all. But by night, behind closed doors, he was callous, demeaning, and, worst of all, psychologically controlling. In their brief 5-week affair, he had demanded she grow her hair out, picked out every article of clothing and jewelry she was permitted to wear, taught her to talk only when she had requested permission, and gave other explicit rules to govern nearly every facet of her life. To switch brands of perfume, wear less makeup, wear less leather, It was clear that he wanted a lady by day and a whore by night. Sage just wasn't wired that way. She was who she was, and whether by sunlight or moonlight, Sage was still Sage. So what if she preferred lace over cotton? So what if she preferred leather over silk? And heels spiked at least 2 inches could be and were mostly comfortable. The fact that they were sexy as hell was just frosting on a very fun cake. Sage didn't consider herself a lady or a whore, and she absolutely detested labels. But that's a whole other soapbox rant. Where were we? Oh, right. Stoney and his creepiness. Twisted by moonlight and straight as north to south by sunlight. Most recently, she'd stumbled across an academic paper regarding the topic of sociopaths in correlation with power and politics. The traits matched Stoney quite accurately. It was most frightening. With the help of the Diagnostic Statistics Manual, Sage did some further research into the label of sociopath. And as much as Sage hated the concept of labels, boxing human beings into categories, she had to admit that Stoney was, in fact, a sociopath. And so Sage became alarmingly aware of the fact that she'd let a sociopath abuse and fuck her. It wasn't that Sage hadn't enjoyed sexual relationships that pushed the boundaries of normal, I hate that label the most, and hadn't dabbled into the kinkier, sometimes darker side of eroticism. But Stoney pushed that boundary way past dark and kinky, and slid most purposefully into sick and twisted. At any moment and at any locale, somebody was breaking somebody else's heart. Happened all the damn time. So why was she so anxious about this particular breakup? Was it even a breakup, being that there was no relationship to begin with? Can't have a breakup if there was nothing significant to break up. It was 2 people hooking up. Now they are not hooking up. Simple. The next night he came to see her at the bar, she explained as gently as she could that they'd be better as friends, and he seemed to accept her rejection with grace. After her shift, she remembered walking to her car. Then everything went blank. Don't remember much about that night, because he had drugged her. And what she does remember was better left undisturbed, somewhere deep in her subconscious. That was 4 months ago.